All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Accessible Alternatives to Carousels and Slideshows. I'm Kelsey Kloboski. I'm a senior digital accessibility specialist here at Accessible Web. And as mentioned before, co-presenting with Heather Berg, a digital equity specialist here. So for a brief agenda of what we're planning to discuss today, first we're going to talk about what is a carousel? What do we mean by that term in web design? What are some of the accessibility and usability challenges with carousels? We'll talk about some alternatives to using carousels in design. Also, some talking points to help you make your case to remove carousels. And if you must use a carousel, if you're in a situation where you really can't move away from using a carousel, we also have some tips for ways to improve them as much as possible. So first, what is a carousel? So just want to make sure we're on the same page and understanding what type of interactive widget we're talking about here, which is commonly used in web design. We see this a lot in marketing websites and other content for users to be able to browse through sections of content, which might be images, it might be marketing banners, it might be all sorts of different types of content. But from the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide, the definition is a carousel presents a set of items referred to as slides by sequentially displaying a subset of one or more slides. Typically, one slide is displayed at a time. Users can activate a next or previous slide control that hides the current slide and rotates the next or previous slide into view. And here on the slide, I've got a screenshot of an example carousel, also from the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. And it's an image, like a travel image of some cliffs and with the ocean with some text over it. So this is a very common type of content that we might see in a carousel, an image with some text overlaying it and some controls to rotate the slides left or right, usually indicated by a left or right arrow. And then also this one has a pause button, which then when you press it reverts to a play button to cause this slide to auto update or auto rotate, depending on kind of your conception of how that's moving. So carousels are a really common widget on the web, but we know that there are some accessibility and usability challenges with them. And to talk about those topics, I'm going to hand it over to Heather.
Thanks, Kelsey. Yeah, so before I jump into some of the specific challenges that carousels can introduce for users, I want to just remind us all and do a very brief overview, refresher on the four core principles of digital accessibility. And you may be familiar with this. The principles, the acronym is POUR, that's P-O-U-R. And the reason why I want to just review these briefly is I'm going to try and frame the challenges presented to users by carousels as they relate to difficulties achieving each one of these core principles. Hopefully make it a little less abstract. So P stands for perceivable. This just means that users can perceive the content is present regardless of what sense they're using. So you need to be able to see it, hear it, or touch it. Operable. This means that users can interact with the content regardless of ability or technology using their input device or method of choice. Understandable. So this is make sure that users have enough information to use and understand the content that's being presented to them. And then the R stands for robust, and this means that users experience the content works across different environments, devices, browsers, and types of assistive technology. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into some of the specific examples here. And like I said, I'm going to try to tie each one of these back to one or more of those principles. So the first challenge that carousels could introduce to users is creating a high cognitive load. And so this means that managing interactive controls while simultaneously processing shifting images can create an unnecessary cognitive burden for visitors to your site. This high cognitive load is especially burdensome for non-visual users who must navigate complex controls while also trying to understand the information that's being conveyed from the content. So by simplifying the interface, you can allow all users to spend their energy on your site engaging with your content rather than trying to figure out how to navigate the container. And so when we look at the four principles, perceivability can be a challenge here. So if you are thrashing around looking for the controls and trying to understand how the container works, you are likely not going to be able to perceive all of the information that is present there. Operability, again, depending on how well those controls are labeled, you may or may not be able to locate what you need to move through the container, and then also understandability, just this high cognitive load of trying to manage multiple processes at the same time could very well make it feel like there is not, in fact, enough information available for the user to understand and interact with the content. Second challenge can be conceptual disorientation. And so the idea of a horizontal track with items moving in and out of view is an inherently visual experience, and it can feel quite abstract or disorienting to someone without vision. So without visual context, the idea that content is present, but can also be hidden in, say, like a side scrolling area, can be confusing and lead to a sense of sort of being lost within the page structure. Providing a linear layout and proper focus order can ensure that the relationships between different pieces of content and information remains intuitive for all users. And when we look at the principles, this can definitely be a challenge for perceivability, especially if you're you don't know that certain information is being visually hidden, or even sometimes, depending on how the code is done, it can also be hidden from things like the accessibility tree. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. Our third challenge is distraction and processing interference. Carousels can introduce um, constantly moving or updating content. And this can be a significant hurdle for people with ADHD or other cognitive and processing differences. So when images or elements slide or fade automatically in and out of view, they can capture users' attention involuntarily and make it really difficult for the user to stay focused on the text or images that they were trying to attend to or interact with. Um, Having a static interface, on the other hand, respects the user's sort of internal and individual pacing with interaction and just creates a calmer environment for browsing. And if we think about our four core principles here, this certainly can be an issue with perceivability. If your attention keeps getting pulled away from the content that you're trying to look at or interact with, you certainly could miss something. And also would argue that operability could be an issue here. If your attention is being pulled away by something that you're not really interested in interacting with, it might not be immediately clear how to navigate back to the content that you were looking at previously. Number four, in terms of challenges, keyboard navigation and focus traps are frequently introduced with carousels. Um, so these are hurdles for those who navigate, especially using a keyboard instead of a mouse or a pointing device. So if the focus order isn't managed with extreme care, users can find themselves trapped in a repetitive loop of buttons, or in fact being directed towards slides that are not currently visible on the screen. So again, choosing a static layout avoids these types of technical pitfalls and ensures that the tab key moves predictably through the site. And this is a pretty much a slam dunk for operability here when we look at our principles. Anytime there's a keyboard trap and someone using a keyboard or other input device that is not a mouse or clickable pointing device is definitely not going to be having a great experience when they're interacting with this. So number five, we have just two more to go. Number five can be a loss of searchability. So in an effort to keep the experience clear, in particular for screen reader users, developers often will hide inactive slides from the accessibility tree. However, this practice usually also removes that content from the browse, find, and page search feature, meaning a user can no longer quickly search for or locate a specific word or product if it's tucked away in an inactive slide. So keeping all content visible by default ensures that every visitor can use built-in browser tools to locate what they're looking for. And this one is pretty clearly lands in the robust principle, meaning that content works across different browsers, environments, and assistive technology types. And finally, the final challenge that we have for you today is contextual disruption. So carousels that have automatic or dynamically updating content can be particularly jarring for some assistive technology users. So for example, a screen reader might announce a new slide without any warning, and this unexpected change can interrupt someone if they are, say, in the middle of reading another block of text, or they're in the middle of a sentence, and all of a sudden the content has updated and changed. Again, it can cause you to lose your place and feel disoriented within the overall document flow. Using a static design prevents these interruptions and allows for a more continuous and user respectful reading experience. And this challenge, I think, touches on a few principles as well. Certainly, perceivability, if you're in the middle of reading something and you get cut off partway through, that's going to make it really hard to perceive the rest of that content. Um, Operability, if you do get taken away from something, it might not be immediately obvious where or how to use the controls to get back to the content that you were previously interacting and with. And I would also argue that just understandability, excuse me, having interruptions like that could make it feel like you don't have enough information to really understand or make meaning of the content. So, in summary, from the user side, I think I can conclude that at best, carousels can create some complication and chaos for users. And at worst, they can actually create a full stop access barrier for some use cases. And with that, I'll hand it back to Kelsey to tell us about some excellent alternatives.
All right, thank you, Heather. And another piece or another challenge that can come along with carousels is kind of related to typically what we see the reason why carousels are being used is wanting to put a lot of content in a very compact visual space or maybe keeping it high up on a website, or you might have heard the term above the fold. So that's often a goal of why we see organizations using carousels, but there's also some challenges around user engagement when we use carousels in this way. For one thing, marketing carousels can look very similar to ad banners, and a lot of particularly visual users have actually essentially trained to ignore those. So visual users are more likely to ignore things if they sort of get a visual impression that it is an ad banner, it's an animated ad banner. They're more likely to just skip over it rather than actually engage with the content. We also see that typically in a carousel, the first slide may get the most views and interaction, and then those views and interactions may start to decrease dramatically on subsequent slides as someone moves through a carousel. So well, I said we definitely give a lot of advice of avoid using carousels if you can. It's great to look for some alternatives. So we would like to talk through some tips on identifying and using those alternatives to achieve some of those goals of presenting content in ways that is findable and digestible to your audience. So first, when you're deciding on your alternative, we recommend that you take some steps to prepare for success. The first is to identify clear goals and priorities, and then to structure the content around those goals and priorities. So that may involve things like committing to a single call of action or to a single highest priority item, and then creating a clear information hierarchy. This can definitely lead to some difficult decisions and maybe more commonly difficult conversations of setting what is actually our number one priority for this content. What's our number one call to action, our number one information that we want users to encounter, and base your decisions from there. Will help guide you in choosing a good alternative to avoiding using a carousel widget. Some specific alternatives. Our first recommended alternative is actually to use static content. And in order to make the most or maybe try to get more information into kind of a smaller visual space would be to use layout techniques such as multi-column or grid style layouts that presents multiple sections of content visually simultaneously. But there are several benefits to presenting content in this way as opposed to a carousel. First is that none of the content is hidden. Heather talked about some of the challenges when content is hidden. It can be difficult to find with search features. It can be difficult to interact with assistive technology. So when all the content is just present on the page by default, that those types of technologies and navigation strategies work a lot better. This type of strategy also easily translates into a linear structure, whereas a visual user may sort of skim the page and look at the different pieces of content. Someone who's interacting with the content in a different way can go item by item and proceed through all the content, know they haven't missed anything, and just proceed in a linear fashion and digest each piece of content as it comes. And as mentioned, also this style of presenting content is also easily searchable. We have a screenshot here from the Accessible Web website. This is a set of webinars from our webinar archive, and this is exactly the kind of content that might be tempting to put into a carousel, right? Each of your carousels have a little banner, and you can rotate through the carousel and see the different options. But what we've opted to do here is more of a grid style layout, where users can proceed through that content piece by piece. And this content is fully available. So if someone wants to know, hey, do you have any webinars about ADA Title II? They can use their search features either in their browser or in their assistive tech, and they will come across our fourth webinar in our grid list here, Agencies, Are You Ready for ADA Title II? So this is a great example of a way to try and get more content above the fold or high up on the site, but without relying on a complicated carousel widget. Our second alternative is tab panels. So this is where we use a tab list widget to display one panel of content at a time. We have a screenshot example here from our website of 3 tab panels, one about recommendations, one about manual auditing, one about user tickets. So each has sort of a clear focus of what the content on that panel is about. The benefits of this alternative is that the highest priority content can be presented first, can truly get a prioritized presentation on the screen. A tab panel can be similar in appearance to a carousel, but is a more straightforward user experience. And part of that is because of my third bullet point here, which is that tab panels offer a high level of user control. Users encounter those controls first and get a clearer sense of what's going to happen when each tab is activated in terms of as a common widget on the web, and gives that control of letting users control what content is visible and understand how much content there is, what's visible, what's not visible, and work through that content at their own pace, and not be fighting with more complex controls or with automatically moving content. Our final alternative to discuss is using the widget known as accordions, or a stacked expanding content panel that show and hide content. We have a screenshot example also from the Accessible Web website, which is a series of questions with a downward caret that indicates that when you click on that question, it's going to open additional content related to that information. So we definitely see this very commonly for presenting content in a very visually compact way. But so users have the opportunity to dig into areas where they want more content related to that first question or that first heading or topic for the expanding panel. The benefits of this strategy is that it does have a very condensed visual space. It allows you to get at least an introduction or that initial impression of content, quite a bit of it in a very visually condensed area. It offers very efficient navigation in terms of users being able to navigate between those expanding components, identify what they're interested in or what they're looking for, and then expand that content to explore further. And similar to the tab panel, offers a very high level of user control in setting the content and reading through it at their own pace, perceiving it and engaging with it at their own pace, and working with a widget that allows them to do an interaction and trust that it's going to stay that way until they make the choice to actively change it. Now, when you are looking at alternatives, I know sometimes it can be difficult to make your case in terms of convincing stakeholders or leadership to move away from carousel widgets. I know they're very commonly used on the web. So we recommend that if you can, especially if you already have carousels and are wanting to move away from those, to gather feedback from your users and to include users both with and without disabilities in that process of gathering feedback to get a sense of what your real users are saying about your carousels, if they use them, if they like them, and what challenges they may be facing with them. And also, if you have an existing carousel, see if you can set up a service to monitor clicks on the carousel slides or the controls, again, to give you a clear picture of are people actually using the slideshow? Is it having the intended effect of people finding the content that's deeper into the carousel? And see if that information may support your argument for moving away from using a carousel in your site. And finally, we know there's some situations where you must use a carousel. There may be things out of your control where you are using a carousel widget. You can't move away from it. And in that sort of scenario, I'm going to pass it to Heather to talk about some tips to try and help those carousels work as well as possible.
Thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, so you may find yourself in a position of just needing to use a carousel for any number of reasons. And should you find yourself there, we have some tips and strategies on how to sort of mitigate some of those challenges that we talked about a few minutes ago. So the first tip and suggestion we have here is to make the same information that's presented in the carousel available in another way. So for example, maybe you have, I don't know, a garden center and you want to highlight some new items for spring, so you pop them in your carousel. You want to also make sure that on that homepage you have a heading dedicated to that content with accessible um, labeled links so that a user can skip over the interactive widget and also find the same information. Um, the second tip would be to provide a skip length. So this is kind of like a get out of jail free card if a user gets stuck inside of a carousel or just in fact doesn't want to deal with it. They have a great option to be able to just navigate past it and move on to the rest of the page. So that's very important. The third tip here would be to clearly label the controls contained within the carousel widget. So if you do find yourself in there or you're wanting to interact with it, it is obvious how to proceed forward and backward through the available content, how to pause or resume dynamically updating content, and then also, like we already mentioned, that skip link, how to quickly exit. Number four would be to set your carousels to paused, so no auto rotation. So on page load, your carousel doesn't automatically start spinning content in and out of view. If you have a control to allow a user to interact with it in that way, that's okay. And again, that gives the user control over whether they want to have that continually updating content or if they prefer a more static environment. And lastly, we have here ensure that all images contained in your carousel have good text alternatives. And I would argue that the word good here is probably a oversight on my part. I would substitute it with meaningful alternative text for your images. So if you've gone to the trouble of putting content in the carousel, it's clearly important to someone because you find yourself in a position of where you're using it. There's probably a good reason why the content that's presented in there was chosen in the first place. And so, to that end, you want to make sure that all your users have the same degree of access and the same information, intended information, is conveyed to all users, whether they're looking at it or navigating through it without looking at it. So those are some tips and tricks to mitigate some of the carousel madness and make the user experience as smooth as possible. And that concludes our presentation. And we should be up to our last slide where we can talk about how accessible web can help.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Kelsey, and we are here to support you in your accessibility journey. And to that end, we offer a number of services. We, of course, have our web accessibility software known as RAMP. Please check the chat for a discount code there for a free trial. And this can be a really useful tool for monitoring your overall web content, not just your carousels, to see how they're doing in terms of accessibility and help you manage your accessibility work. We also offer comprehensive accessibility audits where we will review your content against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and help provide recommendations on areas where you're not meeting those requirements to make recommendations on how to meet those requirements. Based on those audits, we also can prepare voluntary product accessibility template or VPAT reports, which is a report that discusses the current status of your accessibility. And we also offer consulting and training similar to this, both at your own pace or custom trainings that are available where we can support your team in working through all of your accessibility issues. And that can be supporting you through moving away through carousels, but it can be supporting you through lots of other accessibility questions as well. And I think with that, we are ready to move on to our